Around a little bit before that was the 20th anniversary of EPCOT, and I did a presentation for you kind people for the National Fantasy Fan Club, as you were then. And at that presentation, I met Jim Hill. Jim Hill listened to me in my stories and said, "That's a book." And it took me a bunch of years after that, because I'm a major procrastinator. But I've since come out with a book called From Dreamer to Dreamfinder, A Life and Lessons Learned in 40 Years Behind a Name Tag. And basically it's, I wasn't sure if I wanted to write a memoir or a textbook. And so basically it's both. Because when I was a student of all this stuff back in 1970, I read something that Dick Nunes and Van France, who created the University of Disneyland, wrote in a very early book before Walt Disney World even opened. They wrote a book called The Art of the Theme Show, where they tried for the first time to define what Disneyland was, how it worked, because all these people were going to be coming down to Florida to try and do it, to try to recreate it. And they had a line in there that said, nobody raises their kids to work in a theme park, and no college teaches a course on how to do it. And when I read that, I knew that's my course of study. There's nobody to teach it to me, so I'm going to have to find out how to do it myself. And the principles that I discovered of live performance, how to write, how to interact, how an audience's mind works, that's all the stuff that I got to put in my book. So the first part of the book is telling all the cute stories and all the stuff behind this, the scenes, all the struggles with Figment and all of that. And then the last part is a textbook about how to do this stuff well, the 5 steps for creating great themed entertainment and improvisation in the parks, voiceovers, working with lookalikes and all that stuff. So I'm supposedly working on a second book, which will be an expansion of that. I say supposedly because I'm a major procrastinator. And that's it in a nutshell as far as the career is concerned. So basically, now that you know that, I want you guys to talk to me and ask me questions. And I want to say to you up front, I'm free to discuss anything that has nothing to do with me, by the way. If you have any questions about the company or theme parks as an art form, or things that you wondered about what's going on, I've got a new blog that's out there now called Theme Park University. And the whole idea there is to further the writings that I've got in the book. I have a wonderful writing partner on the project. His name is Josh Young. Josh started out as a kid who came out down here from Georgia, and started as a ride operator, and has worked his way up to becoming one of the most knowledgeable people about how theme parks are built, how they're run, from an operations standpoint. I write about the creative standpoint, he writes about the operations. So it's like the Walt and Roy thing, because it's all a blend. I've always defined themed entertainment as dealing creatively with operational reality. We create magic in the real world. So we tell a story and we make it seem like magic, but we have to do it in a world that needs restrooms and trash cans, and charges a lot of money to get in the gate, and has to still show a profit. So do we have any questions out there about anything you've seen? Yes, ma'am?
How did they decide on what Figment would look like, and was his physical appearance, did he come first or did the song come first? Or
the song came, I believe the song came second, because Figment, as many of you probably know, goes back to an early project that was never built at Disneyland called Discovery Bay. Something that Tony Baxter designed, which is going to be this area up the north end of the Rivers of America. It was going to be a kind of a Jules Verne, kind of a wild town, which was run by crazy scientists and inventors. And one of them was a character called Professor Marvel. And he was kind of a little guy, actually, with a giant nose and a big mustache, and he had a little dragon. There was a sculpture of him. When Tony Baxter was doing his presentation to Kodak, trying to get them involved in investing in EPCOT, he ran down the hall, because he remembered the statue that one of the guys had done a little statue of these characters. He said, "Let me borrow this." Grabbed it, went in and said, "Boom, we do the pavilion, we'll give you these characters." They said, "Can we have the dragon too?" "You can have the dragon too." So that was the gist, that was the beginning. And Figment was kind of a skinny, lost-looking, like a beanpole type character back then. He went through a lot of changes. There was a point where Figment was going to be about 12 feet tall, very, very big around, kind of like a baby Huey character. And he had a vestigial beard. He had a beard, kind of like he had a little bit of Chinese ancestry about him. And he was going to be like a big baby. And the whole idea of him being, it was a comic extreme is what they think they were doing. And Dreamfinder also, same thing, went through a lot of changes. When we shot the preview film for The Journey into Imagination, before I flew down here, and this is all covered in the book, before I flew down here, 2 weeks before I flew down here, they called me up and they said, we need you in Florida. And I said, yeah, I know, I'll be there in 2 weeks. They said, no, we need you there today. We're shooting a preview film because we're not sure that there's going to be anything open in the Imagination Pavilion, and we need to have something running in the theater, or we're going to lose our contract with Kodak. So they flew me down, we shot some footage down here, and then we went back and we shot some footage in WED, the WED offices, as Imaginary was called back then. And we shot, we were there shooting there for 2 days. And when we weren't shooting, I snuck around, because I do that. And I found a notebook that said Imagination Concepts. I grabbed that notebook, and inside there were dozens of preliminary sketches of Dreamfinder and Figment. And I got to see how these characters evolved over time. You may have noticed there was one shot in the show that we just saw where Figment was green, because they always thought of him as a green dragon. Everybody, why wasn't he green?
Add foot.
Fujifilm. Fujifilm comes in a green box. Can't have a green dragon. The color that Figment is actually called John Hench purple, because it was a color that was designed by John Hench that he found very likable. He always had ties. He had his ties made up like that. And so he's John Hench purple with an obnoxious looking yellow and red sweater, because those are the colors of Kodak film. And Figment went through a couple other tweaks. You'll see sometimes there's a prototype of Figment puppet that you'll see in some pictures before the pavilion was even fully built. His horns were purple, were purple also. They hadn't gotten to be orange yet. And that's a prototype Figment. I never got to work with him. By the time I met him, when we were shooting the preview film in September of '82, they had the final form of him. And but he went through a lot of different changes. And he continued to change as merchandising came in, because, of course, on the ride, I couldn't walk around with the ride character on my arm, because my arm wouldn't fit through his neck. He was very lizard-like in the ride. So they had to widen his neck and his head to get my arm up inside of his head. And then, of course, all the merchandise looked entirely different, depending what sculpture they were using. Even on the pins to this day, they can't settle on anyone. Yes, sir. Yes, yeah, the young gentleman there in the back. Down the hall.
You were part of the entertainment division, correct?
Well, many people who see me work would question that, but go ahead.
Yeah, no, but if you were, okay, how much direction, it's a two-part question. How much direction did they give you on your portrayal of Dreamfinder and Figment? And how much of it was scripted and how much was improv, since you were a meet and greet kind of a thing?
I got no direction whatsoever from anybody, because nobody had ever done this before. Nobody really knew what the character was going to do out there. All they had was what was in the ride. And that suited me fine, because by that time I had 12 years of experience working in theme parks and developing my own characters. And I had been pretty much gone from one job to another where I was doing something nobody had ever done before. I knew, having heard from Tony the story of The Journey into Imagination, and knowing the thought that went into it, and the purpose and the mission of the characters, I took that as my Bible. And I knew that when I went out there with the guests, I wanted to do the same thing that they were doing in the ride. I wanted to carry forward that mission, that purpose, and I wanted to, in some way, and I did not know how, I wanted to inspire the guests. I wanted to involve the guests actively in that idea that you are a creative being, that there are sparks of inspiration all around, but how do you do this? So I started researching everything I could on creativity. I read everything about improvisation, which I had no experience in at that time. I wasn't even particularly fond of. I always found that when I was doing a character, I would, it wasn't so much improv as learning from the guests what they were going to give me, and then coming up with clever ways of bouncing that back to them that would seem spontaneous to the guest. So I go out there for my first day as Dreamfinder, and I've got the dragon, and I'm out there and I'm just winging it. And all anybody wants to do is have their picture taken with the monkey. That's it. I found that the motivation was, their kid had his picture taken with a monkey, my kid's going to have his picture taken with a monkey. And the parents shoved the kid up there, and they, all right, look at the camera, and then dragged the kid away. And then God bless autograph books. Another thing was just coming into its own at the time. And you sign this, get the picture, get out. And I was going, what? I can't do this for 5 years. I cannot do this for 5 years. I've got to do something more with these characters. They're too good. The mission is too important. So one day the kid comes up, and I looked at the kid and I went, what are you? And the kid went, I'm Michael. You're a Michael. My goodness, I've never seen anything like you before. I said, where are you from? You know, and suddenly the kid was the spark of inspiration that I was discovering. And just like that, I stumbled on the whole thing. I knew exactly what I needed to do. I needed to treat these people as sparks of inspiration. And I needed to force them, against their will, to play the game. And the second that I did that, everybody in the mob around shut up and listened. And I became a show. Now, I didn't have a handler because I was in the Imagination Pavilion. At EPCOT Center, everything was miles and miles away from everything else. We had to take a bus that went from all the way on one end of the park, all the way around behind World Showcase, all the way around behind Future World, and then we had to walk up between the pavilions. So and I was nowhere near the entertainment offices. And so I never, ever saw anybody from management or any show directors.
We're lucky.
Well, I was very on top of which I had a whole pavilion to myself. You know, I was a guy. I had. You know, they'd say to me, "We want you outside the picture taking garden." I said, "Yes, sir. I'll be outside the picture target. Just take your garden, unless it's too hot, too cold, too windy, too rainy, too muggy, or too buggy. In which case, I'll be somewhere inside. We want you out in the garden." I said, "I'll be out in the garden. I'll be out unless it's too hot, too cold, too windy." So I created this show. I would walk out. I'd come out through this doorway that ran upstairs. I had a dressing room upstairs behind the electronic philharmonic. And I'd come walking out of the garden area, and I would find myself someplace with a planter or a wall behind me, and then I would move to form a crowd around me. And all the people would gather, and I would, by moving, keep them in control. And I would remember loosely who came up in what order, and I would call them up and get them up, and then they became the show. Everybody around me was being entertained by the people who were in line in front of them. And I came up with about 4 or 5 different routines that I would do with the audiences, and I would circulate those. And then people had different ways of reacting, and I had different ways of reacting to their reactions. And this way we created a show with Figment and me. Sometimes I would ignore Figment completely. If I was talking to an adult, and the adult was talking to me, I would just ignore Figment. Figment would look at them, they'd look at me, and they'd look at them, and look at me, and then finally they would just say, what is that? And I'd say, do you see him too? Whew! The other thing I had to deal with was, you know, parents have this fantasy in their brain that they're going to walk up to you with their baby in their arms, and as they come walking up, I would see this all the time, they put the baby down, thinking that the child is now going to run up to me, throw their arms around me, turn around, take a picture, and everybody's going to be happy.
Oh, yeah, right.
And of course, the first thing that happens when you put the child down, A, the child feels abandoned. B, I'm now no longer at eye level. I'm now 80 feet tall, and I've got 2 heads and a beard. And so as they would come up to me, as I would see them starting to put the child down, I'd say, pick the child up, pick him up, pick the child up, pick him up, give us a second. call the parent over to me so we were at eye level with the child. Now you got the father over here fidgeting with the camera while this is going on, but now we all got a nice thing. I'm on eye level with the child. They can react to us. And I learned a lot about child psychology and dealing with people. The toughest thing for me to learn was dealing with kids who weren't either very, very young or willing to play. So you get the kids all the time who are like this. And they got no patience for a wizard holding a plastic dragon. And so I found that if they were like this, I'd be like this. And I just let Figment fend for himself. And so long as I didn't come on to, hey, how you doing, everybody? They were fine with me. They loved it. And then what happened was, since I came to them with slightly less energy than they came to me, I was able to then lift the exchange, bring more energy to it, and they'd come up with me. And they'd get drawn into it. And all the stuff that I learned about dealing one-on-one with guests as these characters. This was the science that when I was 17, that I realized I wanted to study. I knew there was a place out there that I could study this, and this is what I pretty much made for myself. The company needed a Dreamfinder out there. They always planned to have a Dreamfinder out there, but they had not given any thought to who he was going to be or how he was going to work. When I came in, there was no beards and mustaches. They had to cut them out of women's wigs. And my general rule is it takes a year. When you're starting anything new in a theme park, it takes a year to have all the pieces in place. So you'll get hired in, you'll open, you'll be there, but you won't have everything you need to do the show. With Dreamfinder, it took 2 years before we had everything in place that we needed to do the show right. And it came in dribs and drabs.
Well, you did a great job, Ron, because you were perfect with it out there all the time.
I'm out of the fingers, yes.
Who do you think is doing really good themed entertainment today?
Renaissance fairs.
Oh, yeah.
If you're talking about the live interaction, it's really the only place that you've got that live interaction going in a way that challenges and embraces the audience and involves the audience, is at the Renaissance fairs. And the reason for that is they leave the performers the hell alone. And they give them what I call benign neglect. They hire very, very talented people and they leave them alone. There's wonderful stuff being done in various theme parks. The wonderful stuff is usually being done under the radar. Disney has a wonderful program called the Living Character Initiative. Monsters Incorporated Laugh Floor, Turtle Talk with Crush, all the animated figureheads that we've been seeing lately. But it's all technically based. It's all technologically based. When it comes to the one-on-one people interaction, Imagineering has never been that comfortable with it. They don't know how to write for that interaction, and they've never been comfortable with hiring somebody who does know. So a lot of the stuff that we see in the parks, and I cover a lot of this in Theme Park University, the blog. And I'm rather outspoken, and I figure the bridges are burning, so I might as well dance. There are ways to do this. This is why I wrote the book. There are ways to do this. The principles are there and they're proven, but you have to believe in them, and you have to fight for them, and you have to believe in them. You have to respect your audience, you have to respect the medium, you have to respect the characters, respect the original story. These are all very important things. And the main job of all the live creative people at Disney, at Universal, big companies, their main creative job is to keep their creative job. Which means that they have to get along with everybody, and they have to please the people upstairs. The people upstairs have exquisite taste, but they think of the guest as other. They think of the guest as those guys, them. We just saw an excellent example of how it should work. It was in the Mickey Mouse cartoon. How many of you, when was the last time you laughed out loud at a Mickey Mouse cartoon? And that was so funny. And all of them that are coming out now are so funny. And the reason is the people who are creating that live in a vacuum where all they're doing, all they're worried about is the stuff that they find amusing and the artists around them find amusing. Think of Bugs Bunny cartoons. Bugs Bunny cartoons are still funny. They still hold up. Even to this day. Why? Because the people who made those cartoons back then were just amusing each other. They had a little building called Termite Terrace off to the side of Warner Brothers, and they were outcasts. But they had terrific, wild sense of humor, and they were just amusing themselves. Walt Disney and his animators who did these exquisite cartoons were entertaining the public. And so the stuff looks great, but it isn't funny. It doesn't hold up. And then they started recently cutting down those cartoons to get to the funny stuff, which works to a certain extent, but not like this. This is borrowing style from John Kricfalusi, if you know who he is, who did the Ren and Stimpy cartoons. As long as we're creating stuff to entertain those other people out there, the stuff's going to fall flat. It's going to seem plastic, and we're going to sit there and it's going to be cute. I have the special definition of the word cute. Found it in a book about TV writing. In the back of this book about TV writing, there was a glossary of film terms, and this one guy defined cute as, I don't like it. If you've ever created anything, written anything, shown it to your friends, and they go, oh, it's cute. That's what cute means. Cute means, I don't like it. In theme parks, though, we have, in addition to that, I don't like it, but I expect other people will. And so we see a lot of stuff going into the parks that's cute.
So that's how you got this.
Well, right there, that's adorable.
It's the ugliest sin.
I tend to go off. Any other good questions?
You think the Lone Ranger will get worked into Disney somehow?
I think the Lone Ranger, no, I don't think it will get worked into Disney because the Lone Ranger as a franchise, while I loved the film, as most people do who saw the film, everyone who hates the film did not see the film. They believe the stuff is written online. It's a wonderful movie. And the thing is, it's going to pay off in the end because it'll run forever. And people will see it on TV and they'll go, oh, hell, that's terrific. It won't get worked into the parks because here comes Marvel, here come the Muppets, here comes Star Wars, here comes Avatar, here comes all these other things. Every time we buy a new franchise, that goes to the top of the heap. And the chance of them ever actually redoing Imagination goes to the bottom of the heap. It's not sexy. It's a terrific movie, and I love it to pieces. And I thought Johnny Depp was brilliant, and I thought they did justice to the old show. You know, in my heart bleeds Lone Ranger. But I don't see we'll see much. The only thing that they've done is they brought the top of the building when he's riding along, at the top of the building, they bring in the music, is apparently being put up over at the studio. Yeah.
You said that you did Monsters Inc. Laugh Floor.
Yes.
How is that creative process just, I mean, it's an instant thing. Obviously, I don't think it's something that, it must be something that comes naturally, but in that setting, when every event is different, how does that work? How do the cast work that out? How does it all come together?
The great thing about that experience was that I got to be there for the 5 months that we worked that out. Because that show was unique in that it was not just a new ride, it was a new technology, it was a live performance folded into it, it was live interaction with the audience, and then on top of all of that, it was supposed to be funny. And so when we came on board we were hired at the beginning of November in 2006. And they hired 20 comics. And I got a chapter about this in the book as well. They hired 20 comics, but then we also had 4 guys from Disney Imagineering, 1 writer, a couple of technicians, and somebody to oversee the show. We had a fellow from Disney Creative Entertainment. We had a couple of consultants came in. If any of you were a fan of the Pee Wee Herman show, Johnny the Genie was one of our consultants. Yeah. We had the woman who was in charge of all voices for the Disney Studios came over, and she oversaw the creation of the voices for us. And lots of chefs. And nobody knew what they were doing. And we were just feeling our way, We had, they had the very primitive animation system that was used for Turtle Talk with Crush, but this was going to be a lot more complex and was going to require 2 operators for every show, not just one. And they had to work in tandem, and they had to animate in real time, they had to interact with the audience, and then we had to create stuff that was funny. And all this stuff evolved over these 5 months, and we needed every bit of those 5 months. They tried to rush us up. We did previews in December, which we should not have done. And we got terrible word of mouth online as a result. But basically they tried different concepts, they tried different scripts. We came up with a limited number of frameworks for each set of characters. And then within that set of frameworks, everybody just brought their own attitude to it. But it wasn't until all the consultants and all of the people from Imagineering and Creative Entertainment, all of them went away, and the 20 comics, the people who knew from comedy and knew how to interact, it took a while for us to get up to speed on the machine and to be able to do the animation. That was a whole other learning curve. But once we had that, it became a matter of having a live audience and playing and discovering what we had and what worked and what didn't work. The shows, if you see a lot of the shows, you'll definitely recognize patterns that you'll think that something's happening that's never happened before, and my God, that's brilliant how they come up with it. It's all happened before. People are, there's something I identified a long time ago called the universal childhood. We all come from the same place. We have the same cultural influences. And given a particular stimuli, there are only going to be 4 or 5 different ways that people are going to respond. And the same thing with Monsters Laugh Floor. Every time the camera goes on the Monsters Laugh Floor and you see somebody, there's going to be somebody next to them doing this. Every single freaking time. And they each think they invented that. There are, and the deeper you want to go into it, the richer it becomes. There's a bit, if you've seen the show, you know there's a wonderful bit that Buddy Boyle was one of the characters that I did. And Buddy Boyle does this wonderful mind-reading act where he gets somebody from the audience to pick a number between 1 and 100, and then he reads the person's mind. I came up with a variation on that that just blows everybody's mind every time it happens. Very few other people in the show ever did it, because I tried explaining to them how it worked, because it was a real twist of the mind to really jerk the audience around, but nobody else wanted to bother. But nobody's really. I've seen it done a couple other times, but it's they rely too much on luck. I took luck out of it quick. But there are wonderful things that you can do because the audience is predictable. You can appear to read their minds and make it look like things are happening that never happened before. And when you're doing theme interaction with the audience, that's where the true magic is. When you try to prepackage things too much, then that's when the adults go on their heels and just watch. And the kids, but you can involve the audience, the adults. You can entertain the adults. That's what Walt wanted. He wanted all of us to be children and be as open and vulnerable and play. And that's what themed entertainment is. What we do in the parks is not about what's in the parks. It's about what's inside you. The name of the show is not The Haunted Mansion. The name of the show is your experience of the Haunted Mansion. And what you see and feel and think emotionally, spiritually, intellectually when you go through that ride. And you may not think so, because you've been on it a million times. I mean, you've memorized that opening room. You know every word he's going to say. But there's something that happens in our minds, willful suspension of disbelief. We walk in there and it's like a child with a train set. Any child who's ever had a train set has at one point or another put his eye down next to the track and just wanted to see what it looked like if it was a real train. So we go on the Haunted Mansion, and there's this little switch in the back of our brain that says, okay, I've never been in here before. And we suspend our disbelief, and we shut everything off, and we just go with it. The reason we can do this is because Disney does such a wonderful job. It's chilly in there, the furnishings are exquisite, the effects are amazing, the sound is incredible, and it helps suck